Hello and welcome to iTunes. So in the earlier sessions, we have seen about the operation related security as well as the application related security, right? Now, in this session, we are going to cover about the storage related capacity. But before that, let's talk about some of the final concepts about the storage security, right? To start with, what we're going to cover in this session is going to be about SAS. Now, what is SAS? SAS is your storage account access service, right? So what it does, before that, let me actually ask you a question. Now you have your data on your storage account, right? And you have an application which actually you want to use that application to do some analysis for the data which is stored on your storage account, isn't it? So how are you going to get the access to that application to that data which is there in the storage account? Okay. Now it could be risky, isn't it? If you're going to give more access, it could be risky. And if you're going to give more access, not only risky, but it can actually incur a lot of cost. Yeah. So if, for example, if you just need to have only read access, well, you can give the read access. But in case if you're giving more, that means if you're going to give write access also, then the data which is going to be added to that storage account, it will incur additional cost, right? So unnecessarily, right? So that is some of the things that we are going to look at in this session, right? So we are going to look at what are tokens, what are the options that we should be using with SAS, and what are the benefits or what are the best use cases that we should be using with SAS, right? So hold on tight and we'll see in this session, right? Before that, please do subscribe to the channel and hit on the bell icon to get notified real time as soon as my videos get uploaded to the channel. Also, feel free to share the channel to your friends and colleagues, right? Okay, great. And I'll see you in the session then. Thank you.
Welcome back, guys. So let's get started with the SaaS that is about the shared access signature service that is provided with the Azure storage. And this is actually a service that provides more security to the data which is stored in the storage, right? And since we are covering about the security features for storage, so thought of taking off some of the core concepts about storage security, right? So let's get started with SaaS. Now, SAS is also actually referred to as shared access signature. Yeah. So it actually provides secure delegated access to resources in your storage account without compromising the security of your data. With the SAS, you have granular control over how a client can access your data. You can control what resources the client may access, what permissions they have on those resources, and how long the SAS is valid, among other parameters. Yeah. So these are some of the things that you can configure on SAS. Yeah. Now there are types of shared access signatures, right? So let's walk through some of the types of the shared access signature. Uh, we would actually go ahead with first one, that is user delegation SAS. A user delegation SAS is secured with Active Directory credentials and also by the permissions specified by the SAS. A user delegated SAS applies to blob storage only. Yeah. So as you know, there are various storage which we can configure with the storage in Azure, right? We have seen that in one of the previous sessions, right? So blob is one of the storage, and when you have to configure the security, you can only work the user delegation SAS will only work on the blob storage, right? Now let's talk about the other one, that is service SAS. A service SAS is secured with the storage account key. A service SAS delegates access to a resource in only one of the Azure storage services. Either it could be blob storage, queue storage, table storage, or Azure files. Yeah. Now the next one is account SAS. An account SAS is secured with the storage account key. An account SAS delegates access to resources in one or more of the storage service. All of the operations available via a service or user delegation SaaS are also available via the account SaaS. Additionally, with the account SaaS, you can delegate access to operations that apply at the level of the service, such as get set service properties and get service starts operations. So those are the things that you can actually use for. You can also delegate access to read, write, and delete operations on the blob containers, tables, queues, and the file storage that are permitted with the service SaaS. Yeah. One important thing to note about is that Microsoft recommends to use Azure AD credentials when possible as a security best practice rather than using the account key. So, I mean, the Azure AD credentials can be more uh, secure and they will not be easily compromised. Yeah. So, those are the important things that you can actually note when you have to design your solution. When your application designs requires SaaS for access to Blue Storage, use Azure AD credentials to create a user delegation SaaS when possible for superior security. Yeah, a shared access signature can have one of two forms. One is ad hoc SaaS, and the another one is service SaaS with stored access policy. Now, what is ad hoc SaaS? So when you create an ad hoc SaaS, the start time, expiry time, and the permission for the SaaS are all specified in the SAS URI. Yeah. So any type of SaaS can be an ad hoc SaaS. Yeah. Service SaaS, on other hand, service SaaS with stored access policy, on other hand, is a different one. I mean, it is defined on a on a resource container, which can be a blob container, table, queues, or file shares. The stored access policy can be used to manage constraints for one or more service shared access signatures. When you associate a service SaaS with a shared uh, access policy, the SaaS inherits the constraints, the start time, expiry time, and permissions defined for the stored access policy. One important thing to note is a user delegated SaaS or an account SaaS must be an ad hoc SaaS. Yeah. Stored access policies are not supported for user delegation SaaS or the account SaaS. Yeah. Now let's talk about how a shared access signature works. Yeah. So a shared access signature is a signed URI that points to one or more storage resources and includes a token that contains a special set of query parameters. The token indicates how the resource may be accessed by the clients. One of the query parameters, the signature, is constructed from the SAS parameters and signed with the key that was used to create the SAS. A signature is used by Azure Storage to authorize access to storage resource. Yeah. Now let's talk about SAS signature and authorization. So you can sign a SAS token in two ways: with a user delegated key that was created using Azure AD, or with this storage account key. Yeah. So these are the two things that you can actually use for the. I mean, you can generate the SAS token. Yeah. Okay. When a request includes a SAS token, the request is authorized based on how the SAS token is signed. The access key or credentials that you use to create a SAS token are also used by Azure Storage to grant access to a client that possesses the SAS. Yeah, you can refer to the table below on how each type of SAS token is authorized and when it is included on a request to Azure Storage. Yeah. Now let's talk about Azure SAS token. The SAS token is a string that you generate on the client side. For example, by using one of these storage client libraries, you can actually create that. The SAS token is not tracked by Azure Storage in any way. You can create an unlimited number of SAS tokens on the client side. After you create a SAS, you can distribute it to client applications that require access to resources in your storage account. When a client application provides a SAS URI uh, to Azure Storage as part of a request, the service checks the SAS parameter and signature to verify what it is valid for authoring the request. If the service verifies that the signature is valid, the request is authorized. Otherwise, the request is declined with the error code 403 forbidden. Yeah. Now you can actually refer to an example of how the SAS URI's format should be. Yeah. So it will actually consist of a storage resource URI and then the token. Okay. So when now let's talk about when to use a storage or sorry a shared access signature. So when a SaaS you you need to use a SaaS when you want to provide secure access to resources in your storage account to any client who does not otherwise have permission to those resources. Okay, so a common scenario when a SaaS is useful is a service where users read and write their own data to your storage account. In a scenario where a storage account stores your data, there are two types, two typical design parameters. Yeah, one is the clients upload and download data via a front-end proxy service, which performs authentication. This front-end proxy services uh, uh, this front-end proxy service has the advantage of allowing validating the business rules, but for large amount of data or high volume transaction, creating a service that can scale to match demand may be expensive or difficult. Yeah. Then the another one is the lightweight service authentications. The client actually uh, then generates a SAS. Once the client application receives a SAS, okay, then they can access storage account resources directly with the permission defined by the SAS and for the interval allowed by the SAS. The SAS mitigates the need for routing all data through the front-end proxy service, right? In the other case, it was actually routing data through the front-end proxy service. Now, in this one, it is actually routing it through the SAS provider service. Okay. So, additionally, a SAS is provided to authorize access to the source object in the copy operations in certain scenario. When you copy a blob to another blob that resides in a different storage account, you must use a SAS to authorize access to the source blob. You can optionally use a SAS to authorize access to the destination blob as well. When you copy a file to another file that resides in a different storage account, you must use a SAS to authorize access to the source file. You can optionally use a SAS to authorize access to the destination file as well. When you copy a blob to a file or a file to a blob, you must use a SAS to authorize access to the storage object, even if the source and the destination objects resides within the same storage account. Now let's talk about the best practices when using SAS, right? Yeah, because we don't want to actually create our own issues in that, right? So when you use SAS in your application, you need to be aware of two potential risks. If a SAS is leaked, it can be used by anyone who obtains it, which can potentially compromise your storage account, and you don't want to have that scenario, right? Or if the SAS provided to the client application expires and the application is unable to retrieve a new SAS from your service, then the application's functionality may be hindered. Again, this sort of scenario is should be avoided, right? So how you can do that? Well, you can always use HTTPS to create a distributed or to create or distribute a SAS. Now, if a SAS is passed over HTTP intercepted, an attacker performing a man-in-the-middle attack is able to read the SAS and then use it just as an intended user could have, potentially compromising sensitive data or allowing your data corruptions for the malicious users, right? You use a user delegated SAS when possible. A user delegation SAS provides superior security to a service SAS or an account SAS. A user delegation SAS is secured with Azure AD credentials so that you don't need to store your account key with your code, right? Have a revocation plan in place for a SAS. Make sure you are prepared to respond if a SAS is compromised. Define a stored access policy for a service SAS. Stored access policy gives you the option to revoke permissions for a service SAS without having to generate the storage account keys. Set the expiration on these very far in the future and make sure it's regularly updated to move it further than into the future. Use near-term expiration times on an ad hoc SaaS service. Yeah, so or service or account SaaS. In this way, even if a SaaS is compromised, it's valid only for a short time. This practice is especially important if you cannot reference a a stored access policy, right? Near-term expiration times also limit the amount of data that can be written to a blob by limiting the time available to upload to it. Have clients automatically renew the SaaS if necessary. Clients should renew the SaaS when before the expiration in order to allow time for reprise if the service providing the SaaS is unavailable, right? So if your SaaS is meant to be used for a smaller number of or immediate short-lived operations that are expected to be completed within the expiration period, then this may be unnecessary as the SaaS is not expected to be renewed. However, if you have a client that is routinely making requests via SaaS, then the possibility of expiration comes into play. The key consideration is to balance the need for the SaaS to be short-lived with the need to ensure that the client is requesting renewal early enough. Yeah, this is required to avoid disruption due to SaaS expiring prior to successful renewal. All right, be careful with SaaS start time. If you start the start time for the SaaS to the current time, you may observe failures occurring intermittently for the first few minutes due to different machines having slightly different current times. Yeah. In general, set the start time to be at least 15 minutes in the past, or don't set it at all, which will make it valid immediately in all cases. The same generally applies to expiry time as well. Remember that you may observe up to 15 minutes of clock skew in either direction or on any request. Correct? So that's why you need to be careful with the SAS start time. Careful be with the SAS date time format. If you set the start time or expiry for the SAS for some utilities, right? You need the date time format to be in a particular format, which specifically include the second in order for it to work with the SAS token. Be specific for the resource to be assessed. A secure SAS A security best practice is to provide a user with minimum required privilege. If a user only needs read access to a single entity, then grant them read access to that entity. And you read, write, delete access to all entities. This helps lessen the damage if SAS is compromised because the SAS has less power in the hands of the attacker. Understand that the account will be built for usage including via a SAS. So if you provide write access to a blob, a user may choose to upload a 200 GB blob. If you have given them read access as well, then they may choose to download it 10 times, including 2 terabytes in egress cost for you, right? So again, provide limited permission to help mitigate the potential actions of malicious users. Validate data within Validate data written using a SAS. When a client application writes data to your storage account, keep in mind that there can be a problem with that data. If your problem requires the data be validated or authorized before it is ready to use, you should perform this validation after the data is written and before it is used for by your application. This practice also protects against corrupt or malicious data being written to your account, either by a user who promptly acquired the SAS or by a user exploiting a leaked SAS. Know when to use a SAS. Sometimes the risks associated with a particular operation against your storage account outweigh the benefits of using SAS. For such an operation, create a middle tier service that writes to your storage account after performing business rule validation, authentication, and auditing. Also, sometimes it's simpler to manage access in other ways. For example, if you want to make all blobs in a container publicly readable, you can make the container public rather than providing a SAS to every client for access. Right? Use Azure Monitor and Azure Storage Logs to monitor your applications. So you can use Azure Monitor and Azure Storage Analytics logging to observe any spike in authorization failures due to an outage in your SaaS provider service or the inadvertent removal of the storage access policy, isn't it? So these are some of the things that you should be taking care of, right? Great. I think we have covered enough for this session, and uh, I'll see you in the next one where we are going to talk one more feature about the storage that is going to be cores. So before that, I would ask you to please do subscribe to the channel and do hit the bell icon to get real-time updates. And also feel free to share this video to your friends and colleagues, right? And do not forget to give me a thumbs icon that helps in motivating providing the new content. All right, great. Until next time, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.